It's Friday, August 26th, 2016, and this is Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. That's me, Kenneth Arthur, and with me today is Spike Friedman of The Stranger and of, these very podcasts. I think you're a frequent guest, so thanks for coming back, Spike.
Thank you for having me, Kenneth.
And I had you over last night. We watched the Seattle Seahawks take on the Dallas Cowboys right here in Los Angeles, home of the Rams. It was quite the game, a fun game to watch in the first half and into the second half with Russell Wilson doing, a lot of what he wants to do. And that's exciting to see as fans. The Seahawks win 27-17. The Seahawks will have to make, cut their roster down to 75 players by Tuesday. And then by September 3rd, they're going to have to get down to 53. So obviously the discussion about the Seahawks starts to center around those players that will get cut. I posted a depth chart for the offense that I think it could be their final 25 players on offense. Even that, it's not necessarily true that they're going to have 25 players on offense, but, it's a guessing game. And it hasn't caused any controversy at all, my own pick. People pretty much just read these things and go, yeah, I agree with that. Or if they disagree, they go, I respectfully disagree. Here's some explanations why, and that's what happens. So that's what happened. Spike, as I said, you watched the game last night. What were your first impressions of the Seahawks in their dress rehearsal?
I felt really good about the offensive line, which was very exciting because given the history with the players currently on the offensive line and the anxiety coming into the season, it was very nice to see them consistently give Russell Wilson a clean pocket in which to work. Both the starters and then as they started to shuffle guys in, like they brought in Jamarcus Webb at left tackle and he didn't ruin everything, which was great. So that was my big positive takeaway. The big negative takeaway was on defense. We looked okay, but that was against Dak Prescott, and when Ezekiel Elliott and the first string Cowboys offensive line was in, they kind of did what they wanted running the ball. And last year, the Seahawks rush defense was exceptional. And obviously the Cowboys rushing offense could be historically great this year. So it's tough to hate on your D-line and secondary for not shutting down that rushing offense. But boy, Ezekiel Elliott looked great, both running the ball and in pass protection. Tyron Smith owned Frank Clark in a way that hopefully will haunt Frank Clark a little bit and make him into a better man than he has been both on and off the field.
I mean, for Frank Clark and every other defensive end on the Seahawks, they don't often get to go up against great tackles. It's not going to happen in practice. So, yeah, it's an opportunity, right, for them to find out what it's actually like to go up against a left tackle or a right tackle that's good at his job.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that way, it was actually pretty good as Cliff Averill was able to do what he wanted against Doug Free. Michael Bennett wasn't shut down by the great interior linemen on that line. And it really was what you could see was our defensive scheme almost working to shut down a great rushing offense and Clark not quite being there yet. But also, Tyron Smith might be the best left tackle in the league since Walter Jones. It was the sort of test that they weren't going to get otherwise. And they passed it. But they got a C+, but it's a C+ on a really hard test, so it's going to get curved up to a B+. I don't know what I'm saying at this point. The point is, our offensive line looked great. The Cowboys' offensive line is great. So those were the most interesting things from the game last night.
Yeah, I mean, if you take a starting five offensive line and a running back, there might not be a better such unit in the NFL than the Dallas Cowboys. So it's a test for Seattle. A warm up for Todd Gurley in week 2 and then later in the season when they play up against the Rams. And I think that the Cardinals have a real special player with David Johnson, and they could be. So it's definitely a test. And we have and as far as Ezekiel Elliott goes, this is literally the first time we've ever seen him go up against an NFL defense. It's his preseason debut and, the number 4 pick. So he could, they did get beat by him. There's no doubt about that. But hey, for all we know, Ezekiel Elliott is the best running back of all time, and he's going to take over for Adrian Peterson and Marshawn Lynch. We'll see. But as far as the Seahawks offensive line goes, the starting five: Bradley Sowell, Mark Lewinsky, Justin Britt, Jermaine Ifedi, and Gary Gilliam. You mentioned some of the things that had switched in and out, and from what you saw, would you make any changes to the starting five?
I wouldn't. And the question mark I have are obviously left tackle is a question mark, but I don't know enough between Soul and Webb and Gim to be able to say that they're making the right or wrong choice right now. But between those three, I know those options are Ron Smith or Walter Jones. There's no obviously right choice there. And so Souls looked fine. He got one up a couple times against Kansas City, but Kansas City's D-line is really good. I'll say that Glowinski looks awesome. Fetty looks solid, except he's had a holding penalties. In the preseason, haven't made me fierce, but when the games count, will make me throw things. I am sure. Justin Britt, center, obviously plays to his strength. He isn't dealing with the speed rushers. Destroyed him at right tackle in 2015 or 2014 when he was still there. So I'm not. It's okay. Like, I don't know why it's Britt over Lewis or Hunt. He looked good, and the running games look good.
About the depth and just I don't know if it's on my end or your end, but you started sounding like Max Headroom there.
With, my bad. No, that's just my voice.
Oh, he's. I'm afraid Spike Friedman has started to glitch, but we'll try and get that fixed up. But yeah, just FYI, it's tough to project the depth because in my depth chart for the offensive line, I went with both the veteran card and the rookie projection card, as I had Jamarcus Webb, Jari Evans making the team as the backups at tackle and guard, Joey Hunt though at the backup center, and Reese Adiambo as the backup tackle and guard. Not a lot of talk about Reese Adiambo's performances so far, I think, which can be a good thing if you're an offensive lineman. Joey Hunt, from what I had heard or seen, he had been stepped up to the second string. Maybe they're just trying it out and seeing how he does, but I think it's pretty obvious by now that no matter what they think of Joey Hunt, they have little interest in seeing Patrick Lewis out there. If he didn't win the job going into last season, or he couldn't beat out John Pierre, he couldn't beat out Drew Nowak, and then he comes in and he gets the job. The offense seems to do well, but then they go out and they draft Joey Hunt and they move Justin Britt to center, and they're trying to do anything they can to avoid Patrick Lewis. So I don't know why that's going to change. For whatever reason it is, this is one of the things about projecting the depth chart or the roster and everything when you get into arguments is, at the end of the day, we have so little information as fans and viewers, and even if you're in the press, we only get so much information. These guys spend 6 days a week with each other, and sometimes 7, and long days, and you don't know what kind of a person most of these people are. And sometimes it's just a personality trait. Maybe it's just a thing where it's like, it's not getting on, or maybe it's, effort, or maybe it's, practice, or maybe there's other in-game things that they're not doing right that they're getting away with on tape. But when they, the coaches sit them down, they said, hey, we told you to do this and you did that, so it's like, we don't know all these sort of things, but what I can go off of sort of is how much guys play and what depth they are at. So for that reason, I would say so we're just trying. And I try to say, hey, look, Joey Hunt, maybe he's going to be the guy at backup. And if it was Patrick Lewis and if they both made the roster, I wouldn't feel bad about it or good about being right if it was right. So, and then Jari Evans, I just think he's so cheap. He's so, he's got such a long and storied history that if you're going to take so many risks on the offensive line, why not have a vet in there? So those were some of my thoughts, taking those guys over Terry Poole, who was released last year, Will Parachak, Christian Stokoli, who I had much higher expectations for after he was drafted last year, and George Fant, who I think with his inexperience should be able to go to the practice squad. Any of those backup guys and depth guys that you really wouldn't want to lose?
No, I think you're right that Fant is destined for the practice squad, and the Sokole thing is a little bit disappointing, but he was always high risk, but also low floor. And so it's not surprising to see him potentially miss out on the squad. Terry Poole is obviously the one out of everybody you've got cut where I'm like, ooh, he could still turn into a useful NFL tackle. But I don't know why I think that, really. I haven't seen him do anything other than just not be totally inept in preseason games to really suggest that he is anything other than sort of NFL flotsam. And given our offensive line's reputation, I'm not super worried about guys we cut getting snapped up immediately and we never get another shot at them if we have injuries. So there's nothing on where I'm terrified. But I think that the real thing with the offensive line this year is that even if somehow the floor is lower than last year's, the ceiling also higher, and you're seeing it with the interior run blocking that the lanes that are open for Michael are even better than the lanes we had been last year for Thomas Rawls. And if Rawls comes back at 100%, we're going to be nasty in the rushing game again this year. And if the pockets against Dallas obviously doesn't have a great pass rush, so keeping a pocket clean for Wilson against Dallas doesn't mean everything. But if we can turn the 20th best rusher in the NFL in non-factor Russell Wilson, he's going to do some really spectacular things here. Because frankly, we weren't able to do that last year until the final 5 games of the season. If we can do that week 1 this season, woo! That sound. Woo! I really love our receiving core, and I love our skill position players, and it's exciting. So it's exciting that we're mediocre on the O-line.
Yeah, it's that's the thing, is that Pro Football Focus ranked the offensive line as 32nd in the NFL. Just updating your records, there are 32 teams in the NFL, which would put them at last place. It's a place to be. It's 30, 28, you'd say we're bad, but 32, you really need to know that the offensive line is apparently some people as bad as it gets. But I think that one of the encouraging things about that is they obviously, and anyone else, is judging the 2015 offensive line, and this is almost entirely different with the exception of Gary Gilliam right now staying at right tackle. So you'd think that you only had somewhere to go but up. I think Justin Britt is an improved center as opposed to Justin Britt, the guard or the tackle. I think there's going to be an article on Field Goals this weekend about that.
Ooh, exciting.
And Germain Ifedi, I think, is a very high ceiling guard that could become a tackle, or maybe just stick in and be a great guard. There's nothing wrong with that, especially when you're trying to block out, Aaron Donald and these types of players. So I think that the offensive line, if it only goes up to being 22nd in the NFL, whatever ranking system you can come up with, that would be pretty good given where they're at, everywhere else. Speaking of which, there were some, debuts last night, but, CJ Prosise playing running back for the Seahawks last night, didn't play a ton, or didn't get a ton of carries, but he did get, I think, 4 carries, and I can't recall seeing Zach Brooks out there.
Brooks got a few down the stretch, but didn't make an impact in a meaningful.
How do you, and just FYI, you're still max headrooming, so.
No. All right. Hold on 1 second. Let me switch my source while you ask this question.
Okay, and that's the max headroom effect. But that's what I'm thinking of right now is Kristen Michael, and it's the question that won't be answered until really 3-4 weeks into the season, and that's if both Michael and Rawls are healthy and on the roster, active roster, and that's the question of how Rawls and Michael will work together. There's a lot of discussion about sort of. Well, I think people, they want everything. So it's like it's
Mhm.
difficult for people to look at a situation where they say, I like this player, and I like this player, and I like this player. They can all be stars. And it's like, look, if they're all playing the same position, there's there's very specialized positions in the NFL, especially today. Danny Kelly wrote about it at The Ringer, how there's less and less, one position type guys. So it's like you think CJ Prosise fits what they want to be as a third down back. So that means that if you want a first and second down back, like you can't have it both ways. Thomas Rawls, it's not like you're going to have Thomas Rawls out there for first down, Kristen Michael out there for second down, and CJ Prosise out there for third down. What you're really going to have is Thomas Rawls out there for first and second down and Prosise out there for third down. And then when Rawls needs a break, if they just get off of a long drive, or, if the offense is out there a lot, then you put in Kristen Michael. But if you go back to the seasons when Kristen Michael was here, 2014, Kristen Michael was active for 10 games, and he had 34 carries, so 3.4 carries per game. If you go back to 2013, Kristen Michael was active for 4 games. Robert Turbin was active for all 16 games, and he had 77 carries, which works out to about 3.5 carries per game. And it's like, I realize Kristen Michael is better than he was back then, but even if Kristen Michael is in there, at most, I think you're looking at 5 carries per game. Thomas Rawls is going to get the bulk of the work, and Kristen Michael, it's going to turn out that way. So you can't have it all, can't have everything. So how do you sort of want to work out the Kristen Michael, Thomas Rawls situation?
I think like what you're saying is the ideal from day one, but I think we were spoiled with Marshawn Lynch's durability for a very long time, and then last season went all the way the other direction to losing Lynch for large stretches and then losing Rawls in pretty catastrophic fashion. And so the sort of in between where your number one running back misses a couple weeks over the course of 16, but generally is taking most of the snaps. And then you've got a third down back, and then you've got a secondary back who can step in and not fall as far as, say, Robert Turbin was from Marshawn Lynch. That, I assume, is the way that they're thinking about it right now, with Rawls getting the bulk of the carries. But if something happens to Rawls, the floor not falling out from like that, like Marshawn Lynch high to that Robert Turbin creamy middle, or whatever he qualified as. And I think with Michael being really reliable and knowing that you could give him 20 carries a game and you're not going to ruin your chances of winning, I think that's big for the front office and for Pete Carroll and Darrell Bevel's just confidence going into the season and being like, all right, Rawls is coming back from an injury. It also lets them ease Rawls in over the first couple of weeks. But then once Rawls is at full speed, you don't want to plan for an injury. But even with Russell Wilson, they always talked about how if he gets hurt and Tavares Jackson comes in, next man up. I think with Kristen Michael and the way he's developed this year, he can be that next man up for Thomas Rawls in a way that he wasn't capable of being in 2014 because he wasn't as mature a runner. And Marshawn Lynch was such a linchpin to this offense that fall off would have been too big, and it would have doomed us. Doom.
Is there any there's also, it's just crazy. I know that it happens, and we look back at old 90-man rosters and stuff, but it just feels like there's 46 receivers trying to get a job on the Seahawks right now. They've got 4 guys who are entrenched, locked in, going to be on the team, and anybody that comes in at that number 5 spot is not going to play on offense unless someone gets hurt or they're doing something really weird or whatever. And players will get hurt, so that's fine. You want guys that can play receiver, but it's definitely not choosing just the best receiver. Who do you like at that number 5 spot right now?
I think that's why McAvoy is very interesting. Same with Doug McNeil, although McNeil didn't get any targets last night, so that doesn't bode particularly well. I don't know who I don't know if any of these guys, Deshaun Fox, I know was back taking some returns. I don't know if any of these guys is a gunner, like deep in his heart has whatever it was that Ricardo Lockett had that the coaching staff loved on special teams, and that some of us as fans were sort of in the middle on because he'd occasionally get catastrophic penalties. But like, I don't know if we've got a guy who's going to be the first guy down the field every time. But if we've got that guy, I don't care if his hands are made of stone, which I think is what you're saying. I want him on the roster because Curse, Richardson, Baldwin, and Lockett are hopefully going to be catching 98% of the passes thrown to wide receivers this year. And so let's not worry about that other 2% in terms of hands. Let's worry about that other 2% in terms of what they're doing, 10 to 12 times a game in special teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's going to be, I think the first round of cuts will be really telling as far as the receivers go. It would be difficult for me to see Montario Hunter, Easy Nwachukwu, Doug McNeil around going into the last preseason game. Maybe the rest of the receivers make it. You only have to cut 15 guys. That being said, Deshaun Fox being hurt or only getting one catch or one playing time, not getting very much playing time. He's missed too much time leading up to now after a strong start to training camp. And then Casey Williams and Kevin Smith not getting out there. That's going to be, pretty. I think if Casey Williams, I think Kevin Smith to a lesser degree, perhaps because he wasn't such a highly touted high school recruit. But if Casey Williams played for Mississippi State, do you think he'd have as many people thinking he should make the team right now?
No. I mean, we've all seen him be great for the Huskies, and that makes a difference because if you see a guy flash over and over again in college, that can feel like a highlight reel in your memory. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that shakes out. But like last year, we were all panicked that like Smith and Williams were going to get snapped up by other teams at the final cutdown. And we were able to put them on our practice squad without a single issue. I don't think that receiver – I think, we can't cut cornerbacks or running backs without them ending up somewhere else, likely on an NFL roster, but at least on a practice squad. But we can cut wide receivers and they'll float for a second. And so that at least, like, eases my mind when I'm like, oh, we're going to lose – Casey Williams. Also, Casey Williams isn't a world-class talent. Like, again, if he can't contribute on special teams, hopefully we don't need someone of his skill level, which is tough to say because he's a great guy and I've seen him be awesome for teams that I like. But like, oh my God, I've seen Doug Baldwin and Tyler Lockett be awesome at a completely different level for a team I like.
I mean, the thing is, too, like, I picked Antoine Goodley today. Like, I wouldn't have picked him yesterday. And I might not pick him tomorrow. And people take it very seriously, which is fine. I think, it's great to feel passionate and have disagreements and stuff. But I couldn't get too passionate about the number 5 receiver spot because I could literally rewrite that article every single time. I could put Casey Williams in there and feel fine about an argument. I could put Kevin Smith in there and feel fine about the reason that I put him there. I could put Goodley there and feel fine about the reason that I did it. I could put Tanner McAvoy and Kenny Lawler and Doug McNeil and Deshaun Fox and feel fine about the argument that I made for them being the number 5 receiver. There is nobody sticking out, and there is nobody – I could feel okay about a couple guys that I think are definite no's, but everyone else has a fine argument, and I really don't care because they're not going to play anything other than special teams. It would be great to me to maybe keep a guy who can like return kicks or do something like that. It would be great to me to pick a guy that's because it's just even getting active every week is going to be an uphill battle for the number 5 guy. You want to keep a guy around with a high ceiling as a receiver. I don't even really. I see the obvious pleasure and reason for doing that. But even then, it's like, okay, Doug Baldwin signed to a new contract. Jermaine Kearse signed a new contract. Tyler Lockett he's under contract for 3 more seasons. Paul Richardson is around for 2 more seasons. And, I think that given his injury history, probably won't cost that much to keep around unless he completely puts that in his back pocket. But even then, he's still the number 4 receiver. So really, the receiver position is so locked up for the next 2 years at least that if you're picking a guy because you're like, I think he's going to be a great receiver in 2 years, you're just going to waste him anyway. So it's like, yeah, not only that, but I think, Pete Carroll has, a strong affinity, as many people would, for bringing in new receivers because it's they're the most athletic guys on the field oftentimes. They're exciting. And we've got, an extra 8 players here that won't make the team at receiver. And a couple of them were around last year. Half of them were around last year. But I think Carroll and John Schneider are excited to think about the next 6 that'll come in and replace them and see who else runs a 4-3 or who else is, a 6'5" freak. I think Tanner McAvoy's versatility is great and very nice for him, but he doesn't do anything great. It's not like he's a one. This is a guy who caught 10 passes in his college career. He wasn't a good quarterback. Here's the thing. I think Tanner McAvoy is an incredibly special athlete and given the whole spectrum of human beings. And it's like he could be in that top 0.1% of athletes. But you know who else is in the top 0.1% of athletes? Tyler Lockett, Paul Richardson, Doug Baldwin, Jermaine Kearse. I mean, these are all great athletes. The reason that Tanner McAvoy, I think one of the reasons that Tanner McAvoy, here's the thing. There's a reason that players don't play 7 positions. Yeah. When you're in college, they go, man, this guy is so athletic. We need a receiver. Let's play him. You look at CJ Prosise. He's a great athlete. He was a receiver. They needed a running back, so they put him at running back. But they didn't go, okay, well, how about you get 5 carries this year, and we'll throw you the ball 10 times this year? And then also, why don't you just go out there for safety on 50 snaps? Like, you just pick one. Can you say we need to make sure that we're utilizing this guy and just getting a bunch out of him as a receiver? So I think that people they get these they get slightly turned on by the idea of Tanner McAvoy being a 6'6" athletic guy who can play 6 positions. But as far as playing in the NFL goes, I would much rather have a guy that was such a good receiver that he was out there for. Then he caught that he had 3,000 career yards in college. I mean, look at a guy like Tajay Sharp in Tennessee right now. He's a 5th-round pick, came out of UMass. Not a big name coming out, but he was, he caught everything at UMass. I think he led the nation in receptions last year. Give me a guy that's a receiver. Don't give me a guy
or Tyler Lockett. I mean, look at what Tyler Lockett did at TCU, not TCU, Kansas State. And how much volume he had and how refined he was as a route runner. And to look at what that's translated to at the NFL level. And with a guy like Tanner McAvoy, it's you're a dope athlete. Please lead America into the next Olympics playing team handball. Be an ultimate Frisbee. Find a sport that doesn't require the amount of specialization that American football does. Tanner McAvoy as a rugby player is more exciting to me than Tanner McAvoy, Seattle Seahawks, Swiss Army knife. Because that sort of broad athleticism that we think of, it really does translate better to some other sports that don't require massive amounts of physical specialization. And so with a guy like McAvoy, man, lead our team handball to the promised land. Can you imagine if we took guys like McAvoy, like a Tim Tebow, put them on a team handball team together? America, we could finally bring home a gold medal.
Last season, going into the year, I remember in preseason, my biggest excitement was in the front 7 and whether or not the Seahawks front 7 could actually eclipse the secondary for the first time. And I think that didn't quite happen. Frank Clark and Cassius Marsh didn't contribute as much as we thought they might following a strong preseason last year. I think this year you're still very excited about the front 7 when you know that you've got Bennett and Averill as the starters, and then you've got Clark going into his second year, and they've added Jaron Reed and Quentin Jefferson. I think those are exciting players, and they brought back Tony McDaniel, and Jordan Hill is healthy and he played on Thursday night, and Atiba Rubin is back. So I think you're excited about the front 7. But this year it's my whole excitement has shifted to those offensive skill players: Baldwin, Kearse, Lockett, Richardson, Graham, Vannett, Wilson, the Luke version, Kristen Michael, Thomas Rawls, C.J. Prosise, Alex Collins, maybe Tromaine Pope, and then all handled by Russell Wilson. What do you think that what are your expectations for Russell Wilson's season this year, given all of the talent? Do you think that the Seahawks offense could eclipse the Seahawks defense, or are these things sort of going to just shift into, a handful, like 2 or 3 of these skill players, and the other ones will sort of get lost?
I think it was Zach Whitman tweeted something out to the effect of the Seahawks offense is going to be better than the defense this year, and he got a lot of blowback for that. I don't think he's wrong. I see, and it's with the huge caveat that like the offensive line has looked competent. It's gotten blown up a couple times by the Chiefs, but it's looked relatively competent this preseason. Clearly, they're more stable there than they were last preseason, where they were shifting guys around every game. Tom Cable and Pete Carroll seem happier with the product they've got together going in week 1. And I feel like it's like if we survive the Rams game week 2 against their defensive line, it's going to take off like a rocket ship after that if they can get through that Ram road game. And so I'm really, really excited about the offense. And honestly, my biggest questions are still at left tackle. Like, those are still my biggest questions. But where do I have the most questions? It's weird, but it's like, I don't know that we've found who's going to take all of Bruce Irvin's snaps in a way that I'm satisfied with. I still don't think we've really replaced Byron Maxwell to my satisfaction. Like, there are more questions on the defensive side of the football. Is Jaron Reed going to be healthy going into the season? And if not, who gets Brandon Meebane snaps? And those are huge questions. And last year, the defense did take half a step backwards. Obviously, they had issues defending tight ends, but the passing defense as a whole wasn't Pete Carroll-esque spectacular. You take away Richard Sherman being able to shut down number 1 receivers, and against number 2 receivers and tight ends, we were pretty much league average, and sometimes below average. And so I still have questions there that Jeremy Lane has yet to answer this preseason. And we could get in there week 1 and they deploy however they want to deploy Brandon Brown, or if he ends up making the team and they figure it all out and it all locks in. Those guys are smart and they're talented, and that could happen. But that's where I've got more questions.
Shifting to the regular season a little bit here, I think it's interesting to, now that the season is almost here, we can take another look at their schedule. And, their first quarter of the season, I think it's, because there's a lot of talk in the past seasons about the quarterbacks that they've faced. And a lot of times those quarterbacks are, backups that we can't project coming in, because someone gets hurt and we didn't know that they would face off against Brandon Weeden or Jimmy Clausen. So we look at this, but still looking at the schedule this year, the first quarter of their season, pretty fair. They play Ryan Tannehill, who, is working with the first year with Adam Gase, but I don't think that Tannehill looked especially special on Thursday night in their preseason game. Then they get Case Keenum, assuming that Jared Goff doesn't take over. And even if Goff does take over, not looking great so far. He's a rookie. It's not what expectations. Yeah. Then the 49ers with Blaine Gabbert, and then assuming that maybe Colin Kaepernick, he could win the job by tonight, though I'm still not. Colin Kaepernick has never had a good game against the Seahawks, I don't think. And then they've got the
not
Jets.
Throwing. He's run well against us, but
not throwing.
Yeah.
And then the Jets, and then that's in a road game, and Ryan Fitzpatrick is okay, but not great. And their biggest problem, maybe I don't think they have a problem defending Brandon Marshall, and I think they'll be okay there. But then I find this interesting: they get a bye week coming off the bye. This is all in a row. Matt Ryan, Carson Palmer, Drew Brees, Tyrod Taylor, Tom Brady. Then they play the Eagles, who could be any one of 3 guys, or who knows. But maybe there's good stuff there. Then they get Jameis Winston, Cam Newton, Aaron Rodgers, back to the Rams, back to the Cardinals, back to the 49ers. I mean, if none of those star quarterbacks get hurt, that's a pretty strong murderer's row. Like, it seems like the secondary, really would be put to the test this year.
Yeah, I think you're right to target, like, they better get their stuff figured out going into that bye week. I'm not terrified of the Falcons this year, but Sherman on Jones feels great. But if Mohamed Sanu, who obviously isn't a great number 2 and who the Falcons overpaid for, but
if he is, flaying our guys, then that's a problem, and that's something they can exploit. Obviously, they don't have a great tight end. I think they have Jacob Tammy now. They've not replaced Tony Gonzalez, so I'm not terrified of that. The one that I look at, obviously that Cardinals game is huge. That's monumental. That's for all the marbles. If we win in Arizona week 7, that's huge. But when I look at that Saints game, coming on the downside of that massive game against the Cardinals, we have to go back across the country. It's an early start time. I feel like the Saints are kind of a joke because their defense was one of the worst in the history of football last year. But that offense was still really, really good. And they still won 7 games running out the 32nd defense by a significant margin last year. And if I'm looking at a quarterback who can exploit our secondary if we haven't figured things out, it's Drew Brees. And so that feels like the trap game in there. Because obviously the Cardinals game and the Patriots game and the Panthers game and the Packers game, those are the 4 big ones. But when I look at the ones where you kind of glance over and you're like, oh, that's a win. But then you're like, at New Orleans, morning game, Drew Brees. Oh, that's going to be 45-42. Is he going to figure it out with Fleener? Is Fleener going to get a last second touchdown over KJ Wright? I hate this already. So I don't know. That's what I see when I see that murderer's row is you don't get that chance to reset and you got Carson Palmer. Now Drew Brees is here and it's early in the morning and you better be ready because Drew Brees is still a problem even though he's 400 years old.
It is interesting just to look at it's a tough schedule. You got the Cardinals, obviously could be the best team in the NFL. The Rams are tough. We talked last night about how strong their defense is starting to look at 3 levels with, Tremaine Johnson, maybe emerging as a cornerback. And then they've got Alec Ogletree in the linebacking corps and then Aaron Donald up front with Robert Quinn. It's good. And so they've got those 2 tough teams. And then, talking about at New York Jets, at New Orleans Saints, at New England Patriots, at Tampa Bay, at Green Bay. That's difficult. They'll be on national TV 5 times, which is a strength of theirs usually. So that's something, I guess. But a really difficult schedule. And I think the Seahawks are still the best team in the NFL. That's my opinion. But if they scratched out 12 wins, that would be incredibly impressive to me given this schedule.
Yeah. It feels, it could be a really tough schedule. We don't know what the Bucks are going to look like come week 11, and we don't know what the Eagles are going to look like the week before that. If those 2 end up being relatively easy games, then I think our schedule is pretty average, actually. But those 2 could not end up being easy games. Jameis Winston could make the leap. I really don't like the guy. And coming out of college, I thought he was the inferior prospect to Mariota. But by the end of last season, he was playing a lot better. And if they get their defense together at all, and it's Mike Smith coordinating, I don't know what Mike Smith as a coordinator is going to do. I can't imagine it's going to be exciting, but it could be effective. He's Mike Smith after all. So that could be a problem. At the same time, if we're getting Case Keenum twice with the Rams, their defense looks good, but I'm not terrified of them. The 49ers don't look the strongest. I don't know. It's going to be really interesting. It's just sort of unrelenting, but that's the NFL. It's just sort of, we don't ever really get a break. There's no period where it's all right, let's get our guys healthy, beat the Bears with Jimmy Clausen and the Cowboys with Brandon Weeden and pull it back together, unless some of these quarterbacks do get hurt. And it's really the thing that is bumming me out and has bummed me out since the schedules were released is the Cardinals get Jimmy Garoppolo and we get Tom Brady. The margin in our division is going to be narrow. And if we lose the division, that's an extra playoff game. That's every playoff game on the road. And that's a huge disadvantage. And that one game could swing everything. And I'm going to have to root really hard for Jimmy Garoppolo to beat the Cardinals. And that feels hard. That doesn't feel like it's up my wheelhouse.
Is it fair to say, like, are we sure that it's Jimmy Garoppolo? Could it be Jimmy Garoppolo or something?
I haven't talked to the guy. I
I
haven't
don't know.
asked him.
I'm sure that it's Jimmy Garoppolo, but it seems like a fun question to ask.
It could be Janine Garofalo.
It is Jimmy Garoppolo.
That's great.
This is my last question, I guess. Another area of concern. I think there's a couple areas of concern, obviously, and they haven't been the same two areas of concern on defense all summer, which is strong side linebacker and the other corner position. Just any final thoughts on, Jeremy Lane, Thurl Simon, and Deshaun Shedd after last night?
I'd love for one of them to flash. I'd love for one of them to start breaking up passes. Dak Prescott didn't complete anything down the field, but he was completing everything underneath. And so, we get spoiled by a guy like Richard Sherman who can take away, who never gets the top blown off of him and also can break things up underneath. And I just want like one of those three guys to start being capable of doing it all, being the guy who can do both. And none of them are doing that right now. And so, Dak Prescott, I think you tweeted out he was averaging like 5 yards an attempt, which is great. That shows that our secondary is actually playing really well. But he's also like 15 for 18 at that point, which means that we're losing the field position battle. They're grinding us. We're not getting turnovers. And it's just like, oh, could one of you step up and pick off a ball, please? Please. And I don't know. So it's like
interceptions last season, but I think that is sort of their strategy and always has been, which is to force the court, if they're going to move down the field, to force the team, the opposing team, to take as many shots as they need to move the field, right? Not giving up big plays, making them make a lot of plays to move down the field because they do feel like at some point they're going to fuck up, right? And turn the ball over.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the Pete Carroll philosophy. And it requires having ball hawking corners to a degree, but they also have to be super disciplined and get their footwork right every time. And so it's a big ask. And that's where I'm like, I want to be critical of Shedd, Simon, and Lane because, they aren't ball hawking right now. They're not getting those interceptions. They didn't last year. They're not in the preseason. But at the same time, they're also not giving up the explosives. And if you win those explosive battles, that was our path to the Super Bowl in back-to-back seasons. So it's like, yeah, I don't know. I just wish one of them spent this offseason becoming Richard Sherman, but that didn't happen, which I guess is okay, I guess. And I also wish Cam Chancellor looked better, but, he's older. He's got a physical. I mean, I don't know.
It's interesting, Richard Sherman, Cam Chancellor, Earl Thomas. Those three guys, arguably, Hall of Fame talents playing together now, going into their 6th season of playing together. This is like hitting that status of like one of the great units of all time.
Yep. Yeah, I think you have two surefire Hall of Famers there. I mean, honestly, I think like if Thomas and Sherman play this year healthy and the team makes the playoffs, I think that, you're punching a ticket to Canton for both of them already. And with a guy like Thomas, you've maybe seen him lose a little bit. And with a guy like Sherman, you really haven't. And that's amazing. That's incredible. And like, we're so lucky as fans to be like, when we think about our team's pass defense taking a step backwards, it's within the context of having the league's best cornerback and best safety. Like, that's insane. It's and having it for, like you're saying, 6 straight seasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll see what happens with the number 4 and 5 spot in that secondary. And I think that they've also got some guys they really like back there with Kelsey McRae, who had a good game, and then Tyvis Powell. And still not sure what to think of Brandon Browner or, the status of where like Ty Smith and Marcus Burley sort of line up with these guys. So those will be questions sort of answered in the next week and a half, and sort of as they lead into that opener against the Miami Dolphins. And that's it. That's it for today's Seaside Chat. Spike, did you feel that you were by the seaside?
I did. It was mostly the sound of my cat scratching against the door as I closed her out to record the podcast that sounded like the waves.
Ah, yes. Those majestic caddy scratch waves. I can't speak, but who needs to talk when you're doing a podcast? This has been Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. Spike, your Twitter handle is probably at Spike Friedman.
Yep.
There you go. Read The Stranger and other such things. Hey, Spike, do you want to promote Seattle Sketchfest?
Oh, yeah. I'm doing Seattle Sketchfest. It's with Jason and Spike. That show is Friday. It's right before the Rams game. It's Friday the 16th. I will be at the Pocket Theater. So if you're in Seattle and want to see me do sketch comedy, hey, do it. Be
Awesome.
there.
Friday, September 16th at the cafe. What cafe?
Pocket Theater.
Pocket Theater in Seattle. Seattle Sketchfest. Spike and his buddy. What's his name?
Jason and Spike.
Jason and Spike. So, yeah, definitely check that out. That's awesome. And, yeah, that's it for this week's Seaside Chats. Next week, the Seahawks take on the Oakland Raiders at Thursday at 7 p.m., and then they will be opening the season September 11th against the Miami Dolphins in Seattle. The following week, they'll be right here in L.A. taking on the Rams in the first game at the Coliseum. First game in L.A. in 21 years, and the Seahawks will be there. So check that out and subscribe to this podcast, I guess. It's Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. And check out Field Goals, fieldgoals.com, and like on Facebook, Twitter, blah, 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 blah. That's it for today's August 26, 2016 edition of the show. We will Seaside you next time.